you gotta know when to change tactics. Okay, so normally I would be loath to do 2 videos relating to DCEU and DC related movies in a row, but this occurred to me a couple nights ago when I was doing the record for one of my podcasts, Go Home Hollywood You're Drunk, available on the Council of Geeks Network podcast feed. And talking about one specific thing got my mind spinning, and a lot of this I said in the podcast, but as I've noted before, I have way more viewers than I have podcast listeners, so I don't mind revisiting that thought a little bit and possibly expanding on it. Now, this spawned from something that was said by Adam McKay, who is currently the director for the proposed Nightwing movie. Now, he was basically asked, why wasn't there anything shown at Comic-Con? I mean, Nightwing didn't even have a logo. There was nothing, no announcement, nothing at all, which struck some people as a little unusual. And I think while no one was saying it outright, some folks were starting to wonder, is this movie actually going to happen? So what Adam McKay said was, he actually put it in the greater context of his career as a whole. And he said, look, there have been lots of projects over the course of my career that I have turned down, mainly because they came attached with already assigned release dates, meaning that I was not going to be given the time that I may need to make this work, and it was going to have a deadline forced down my throat. That is not the case with me working on Nightwing. That's why I'm doing it. So that was his way of saying that Warner Brothers is not enforcing a strict, here's your release date, you must hit this, which we know they did already with Suicide Squad. And I mean, that's not exclusive to them. Fox has a massive history of pulling this kind of crap. But this is a very different approach that they appear to be having in terms of what they are granting Adam McKay. And one can start to wonder and extrapolate, because a number of the major projects don't have release dates. We don't have a release date for the next Batman movie. They don't seem to be getting as rigid about saying when stuff's coming out, just what they're working on. I don't think we've got firm release dates on Shazam or the supposed Black Adam movie either. There's some stuff they've given us years for, but it's not like, say, how Marvel has done, which is whenever Marvel announces a project, they also announce at the very least the year that it's going to be coming out. Right now, Warner Brothers, with their DC-related projects, has a whole bunch that they've announced with no release dates attached to the year. And this, I think, is a very good thing. Because whether or not you feel this works better than Marvel, this is very different, and what I'm about to talk about. And I think it is good that Marvel and DC movies get approached differently, because otherwise we end up with just homogenized product across all superhero movies, and I don't want that. So what the DC related movies have done, even going back into like Batman or arguably even Superman, though that was really a different era of filmmaking, but they had a tendency to go after really big visionary people to head these projects. Tim Burton early on, they brought in Joel Schumacher when Tim Burton kind of scared them a little bit, so that changed things to a certain degree. But then they brought in Christopher Nolan to do Batman again. And they brought in Zack Snyder, and whatever you may feel, or whatever I may feel about Zack Snyder and his output, the man's got big ambitions. He's not a guy that you just bring in to just plug into the property, like, say, was what happened when they had Martin Campbell come in to try and do Green Lantern. I like Martin Campbell as a director, but he's good at being plugged into existing framework. That's why his James Bonds are so good. They needed a more visionary director. They didn't get one. It didn't work. So they seem to be trying to recapture that approach that served them very well in the past. Now, when they got Zack Snyder and they had, Man of Steel, and there's some debate now, it seems like, how much a BVS, the theatrical release at any rate, was what Snyder actually wanted to release to films, but I think even if you want to argue that it was cut down so that it was less coherent, which I don't question, it seemed very much to be his vision of the movie, even if it was a truncated version. So it still felt very much of his. Now, David Ayer on Suicide Squad, we know, massively messed with across the board on that. Patty Jenkins, they left her alone to do Wonder Woman. So I think Warner Brothers is starting to realize that whenever they've meddled, whenever the studio has gotten more involved with more mandates and more meddling, that's when we've gotten stuff like Batman and Robin, Green Lantern, Suicide Squad. That approach is not working. They need to back off. They need to stop imposing these kinds of rigid dates and expectations if they're going to continue to try and bring in directors who want to bring their own flavor and are going to want to do their own things, like Adam McKay clearly wants to do, or like hopefully Matt Reeves will do with the Batman. Now, to contrast that with Marvel, Marvel brought in, Visionary might be pushing a little, but Marvel brought in their people with stronger, specific artistic voices earlier on in the process. You got people like Kenneth Branagh on Thor. And as they've sort of gotten momentum and moved along, they've been turning much more towards television people. That's where the Russo brothers came out of. And I think that's because Marvel has a very clear vision and they know what they want, and they just want someone to come in and give, give their little touches, but ultimately deliver what they've already said they want it to be. That's why Edgar Wright ultimately bailed on Ant-Man, because he wasn't going to march to the beat of their drum to the extent that they wanted. I still personally have a feeling that the Ant-Man we got was not, it probably had a little less visual style, but it was probably not hugely substantively different from what Edgar Wright would have delivered. He just didn't want to work under the kinds of restrictions that they were giving him. Now, the reason this has worked for Marvel, as opposed to DC, where it has completely backfired when they've tried to impose restrictions, is that Marvel has been courting people who are used to working in those circumstances. Because when you get people who work in television, again, like the Russos and some of the other people they've gotten, you're getting people who are used to being told, here's this existing property with these existing characters who are expected to behave in these ways. Here's your episode to do within this greater framework. And they just don't have the expectation to lay in as much of their own singular voice. So Marvel has been courting talent that works with the way they are choosing to approach the movies. DC, this has really backfired on them because they were still courting or trying to bring in people with clearer artistic voices. Like David Ayer has a pretty clear, distinctive cinematic voice, and yet they restricted and handcuffed and threw all these restrictions at him. Like, you can't have both. And this is part of where trying to rush into the big cohesive cinematic universe really hasn't been working for DC. So here's where I think this is a good thing, where it's an altering and it's going back to something that has worked for them more often. Because, and I've said this before too, I think that if DC can get back to the structure, which is the more mentality that they got when we got Tim Burton on Batman, Nolan on Batman, but they just seem to do Batman better. Anyways, getting back to that mentality and that approach can result in much better individual movies. I will still attest, as much as I love Marvel and I love the MCU, they have not produced a single film that can even come close to rivaling The Dark Knight, and I honestly don't think that they can. But they have a much more cohesive and flowing and appropriately interlocked cinematic universe than DC has been able to build. And I think DC needs to swallow the idea that, at least at this point, they can't do that. It's not playing to their strengths, or at least the strengths that they've had in the past. Because in the past, as I've said, they've resulted in the best product when they have gotten good people with vision and just let them do their work. Burton, Nolan, Jenkins, this is when they got people and left them alone. Now, it doesn't always work. As I said, even Snyder's better film that he did, Man of Steel, it was not universally loved. Some people do love it, and that's fine, but it was kind of a mixed bag reception. But still, that was certainly better than the reception to when they have really gotten in there and meddled or put a ton of restrictions up, because that's when we've gotten Green Lantern, Suicide Squad. So again, this is a good approach. This is a good way for Warner Brothers to start dealing with this. Here's what has to happen though, and here's where I'm afraid they're gonna get cold feet or fall back into the mistakes they've already made. By allowing individual directors more freedom to craft individual films the way they want to deliver them, that is going to make it much harder, if not impossible, to interlock these films with anything near the tightness that Marvel does. Because the reason that Marvel is able to have all these characters cross over left and right and have everything line up in a timeline and everything like that is because it's all scheduled ahead of time. So they know when they need these actors. They know when the movie needs to be delivered by. All of this is already set. And then they get, you know, people from TV or whatever who are used to working under those circumstances and put them into direct. But if DC is going to go back to courting and then allowing the freedom for directors to take as long as they want, they can't lay the same kinds of plans that to try and have the same level of cohesion that Marvel has accomplished, because you just can't do that when you're allowing your directors that degree of freedom. And I don't say that as a criticism, I say that as a reality. If you have directors like Matt Reeves, like Adam McKay, like Patty Jenkins, you need to give them the space to do what they're going to do. But that means that you can't dictate to them when it's going to be ready by. And if you don't know when it's going to be ready by, that means you can't build that same kind of cohesive cinematic universe, because you don't know for certain when this movie is going to come out. Maybe this one will be done first and this movie will come out first, and you won't know that until they start going to production, and then you've got to plan around that. But now things are already moving and it's trying to get them into lined up, and then you get into over meddling and it becomes a mess again. I think that DC needs to back off, and I'm not saying abandon a cinematic universe, but they need to really back off the idea of trying to do anything as tightly controlled as Marvel is doing, because it's not working for them. And I'm hoping that Warner Brothers has the awareness, or at least has gained the awareness to do that. So if they do, if Warner Brothers can get to the level where they go, look, we need to back off the cinematic universe thing. We'll still, you know, there'll still be some crossover, we'll have Easter eggs, whatever, but we need to back off trying to match the level of crossover that Marvel is able to do very casually at this point. We need to get off that expectation, and I hope that they can do that. And one of the things that might cause them to not be able to do that is fans. We need to back off the expectation that DC will do that. We need to look at getting the best individual films that we can, because that is what potentially DC can do, maybe even better than Marvel. If they could start consistently cranking out material, and that's the wrong term because crank implies it's a machine. If they can get away from the machine and start consistently allowing directors and creative people to produce the best possible work that they can, then we could be getting individual films that could potentially be better than anything Marvel's putting out, but it's just not going to be the same level of an overall universe. And honestly, that's a balance that for me as an audience goer, I would kind of like. I think it would be cool to sort of look forward to seeing what individual DC movies are doing, while at the same time over on the Marvel side getting very wrapped up in the whole interconnectedness of everything. That way I'm actually getting different things from the different universes. And maybe if the friggin' fanboys would get off each other's butts for a second, it would make them realize it's okay to like both, because they're each doing a different thing. Where DC has fallen down is in their attempt to catch up to Marvel. Initially with BVS leaping right into the, getting as many characters as we can into this lead, jumping right into the team up, and then just trying to exert a level of control that Marvel has shown to have over directors that aren't, they're not built to just be slotted into a machine. Directors with vision need to be allowed to do their vision. So I really do hope that this quote from Adam McKay, and I've extrapolated a lot from one quote from one director. It could just be him that they're giving a lot of freedom to. But I'm more optimistic on Warner Brothers these days. They've still got a lot of goodwill they need to earn back from me. But because right now, a lot of these things are in process, and I'm looking at the processes they're going through, and I'm going, these are smarter ways to go about a lot of these things. So you are indicating to me that you seem to be getting better. The proof is ultimately going to be in the pudding, though, because I won't truly be able to say they've won me back until we get more movies that actually work and are good finished products. So I'm not like woo on DC yet, but I'm certainly in a much more positive spot than I was when I did that incredibly loud, shouty video saying how I wanted the DCEU to fail. I think that they may have found the way forward that will work. And that quote from Adam McKay indicates to me that maybe, just maybe, they've gotten off this idea of we need to catch up to Marvel and instead are going, what do we do that Marvel is not doing, and do that instead? And I hope that that's the case. And I hope that if that is what they do, and they focus more on doing the best individual films and less on building a huge universe, that the fans will not whine about that. Those are my thoughts on what might be the future, and a bright future, for the DCEU. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that I'm nuts for thinking that this approach is good? Do you think they should be doing something else? Do you think I have just completely presumed a whole bunch of stuff and I am talking out of my butt from the word go? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, which I already mentioned, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, also available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.